All right, we're going live on YouTube. I need to double check the sound as soon as I get there. Perfect, no feedback, and we are live. Thank you. Thank you everyone for joining today at our pre-summit webinars for our 10th annual Bike Walk North Carolina Summit. We're going to be beginning here in just 1 second. So be patient and we'll start in just about 30 seconds. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and welcome to today's session. A couple of things that we want to do today is to let you know that we are recording this for live on YouTube as well. And we want to remind you that throughout this webinar, we're going to have some incredible presentations. And if you have any questions, we want to guide you to our Q&A box down at the bottom of your toolbar and to ask any questions throughout the webinar that you may have. If that doesn't work for you, you can use the Q&A, but we'd love to be able to hear from you throughout. I want to begin our Vision Zero pre-summit session. Or what's being done to get us there. And today's moderator is going to be Becky Newman. Becky, thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Terry. All right, so we're really excited about this session and excited to help kind of kickstart the summit along with hopefully the talk you all were able to attend earlier today by Miriam Kenyon. In this session, we are going to focus, as Terry mentioned, on Vision Zero and pedestrian safety, both from the national perspective as well as kind of what's going on here in North Carolina. So I'm sure many of you are aware of Vision Zero and kind of aware of what we're trying to achieve within it. Just as a little bit of level setting, Vision Zero really is this kind of notable shift in the way we do business, right? It starts from this ethical belief that everyone has the right to move safely in their communities, and that system designers and policymakers and really all of us on the call today, right, share a responsibility for ensuring safe systems for travel. It acknowledges that there's a lot of complexity in safe mobility and in transportation safety, right? We're thinking about roadway design and speeds and norms and technology and policies. And to achieve that, right, we know that we each have to do our piece based on the pieces of the system that we can each touch, whether we are advocates or researchers or policymakers or wherever you sit on this call today. So why is this discussion that we're having today so important to have at the BikeWalkNC Summit? Well, Vision Zero, we know, is especially focused on ensuring that roadway users who have been kind of historically kind of ignored in our roadway designs and some of our infrastructure decisions are reprioritized in our transportation safety work, right? So we're talking about pedestrians and the cyclists and the way that some of those travelers have been left out of some of these historical decisions and are thus particularly vulnerable to injury in many of our roadway settings. So we have 3 panelists today that are going to dive in and tell you a little bit more about what's going on in both kind of the practice and research space related to Vision Zero with that focus on pedestrian safety, since that's so core and important to Vision Zero work. So with that, I want to go ahead and introduce you to our 3 panelists. So You'll first be hearing today from Tamara Redman. So Tamara is the Pedestrian and Bicycle Safety Program Manager in the Federal Highway Administration's Office of Safety, where she's worked for 24 years. In that job, she develops programs and resources to help reduce pedestrian and bicyclist crashes, fatalities, and injuries. Just a few of the recent accomplishments that she and her team have been working on include an updated pedestrian and bicyclist road safety audit guidelines and prompt list, a development of a guide for scalable risk assessment methods for pedestrians and cyclists, and a completion of a bikeway selection guide and supplemental resources on parking and intersections. She's the recent recipient of the FHWA Administrators Superior Achievement Award and the Administrators and Secretaries Award for Ped Bike Program Area. So we're really excited to have Tamara here with us today to tell us about kind of what's happening at the federal level. After Tamara speaks, we'll then hear from Jessica Chiquino. She is with the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety based out of Arlington. She'll also be giving us kind of that national perspective on some of the research that they're doing. And so she conducts and oversees research on a variety of transportation safety issues, notably including pedestrian and bicyclist safety, speed, and how drivers are using new vehicle technologies. Prior to being at the Institute, Jessica has a lot of experience also sitting at the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. And then last but certainly not least, we'll be bringing it home and hearing from Mark Ezel to talk about what's going on in North Carolina related to Vision Zero. Mark, I'm sure many of you know of Mark's work. He was appointed by Governor Roy Cooper to lead the North Carolina Governor's Highway Safety Program in 2017. And in that role, he leads a group of dedicated professionals working to reduce traffic deaths and injuries in North Carolina. They fund over 100 local and state traffic safety initiatives spread throughout the state. And he serves as the governor's representative for highway safety, which is really responsible for coordinating policy efforts that lead to safe transportation for all road users. He has more than 20 years of experience leading a variety of public health and public safety efforts and initiatives across the state, and so brings kind of a wealth of knowledge to really painting the picture of where we are in North Carolina right now related to some of these efforts. So with that, what we're going to do is I'm going to let each of our panelists speak for about 10 to 12 minutes. We'll have questions after each presentation, probably time for a couple of questions for each of them. So as Terry mentioned, we very much encourage you to use that Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And as you're hearing these talks and these presentations, feel free to throw in any questions you have for the panelists and I'll compile those. And I think that's it. As Terry mentioned, we are recording today just to acknowledge that. And I will go ahead and turn it over to Tamara. So Tamara, thanks for kicking us off.
I'll try to get the share screen thing going here. Can you all see my screen?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Just hit that presentation button down at the bottom right-hand corner. One more to the right. One more.
Here?
One more. That one. Perfect.
All right.
One more time. I don't think you got it.
Okay. All right. So just to start off, I just want to say that my office, the Federal Highway Administration Safety Office, focuses on reducing roadway fatalities, injuries, and crashes through the development of tools, technology, and resources. And we also try to leverage the resources we have available by focusing on areas and places where we think we can make the most impact. And that's what I'm going to discuss in my presentation. So I'm going to talk about the bikeway selection guide and supplemental resources, the updated pedestrian and bicyclist road safety audit guide and prompt list, our efforts in the pedestrian and bicycle safety focus states, our proven safety countermeasures list that we're promoting, and finally, the complete streets. That's very important to my administrator. So the bikeway selection guide was published in 2019 to support other technical design guidance, such as the forthcoming AASHTO guide for the development of bicycle facilities. Sorry, I'm trying to move this. Okay. And it helps transportation practitioners consider and make decisions about the trade-offs related to different bikeway types on different facilities, and where they could best be used. And we also just in the spring completed 2 additional resources to complement that. There's one related to traffic analysis and intersection considerations, and also one having to do with on-street parking and bikeway selection process. So we got feedback during the 2 years that we developed this, that we needed more information on those. And so those are now available as well. We also recently updated the pedestrian and bicyclist safety, road safety audit guide and prompt list. And for those that are unfamiliar with road safety audits, it's basically a formal safety performance examination of an existing road, or it could be a future road or an intersection, by an independent multidisciplinary team. And it basically estimates and reports on potential road safety issues and helps identify opportunities for improvements in those. So the pedestrian and bicycle safety focused states and cities effort is something that we've been doing. It's an approach we've been doing for about 17 years now. We update the list about every 5 years, depending on current data. But basically what that means is we've been providing extra resources to cities and states that have the highest pedestrian and bike fatalities and/or fatality rates. And we're not giving them additional funding for projects or countermeasures or facilities. Rather, we're providing extra resources to help them with developing pedestrian and bike safety action plans. We're offering free technical assistance and training on the design of safe facilities and on how to develop an effective action plan. And as I mentioned, we evaluate these every 5 years or so. So we recently reevaluated the current list of states and cities, and we're going to be rolling out a new approach in the coming months. And it's quite a bit different than it has been the last few times we did this. In 2015, we had quite a few states and quite a few cities within those states. And now we're focusing on a smaller number of states. And instead of focusing on cities, we're going to be looking at metropolitan planning organizations instead, and offering assistance to entire MPOs rather than specific cities. So this slide shows you I think there's 15 MPOs that will receive extra assistance, and those are within the 9 states that you can see on this list here. So over that 17-year period, we've delivered about 400 training courses. We've trained about 6,000 people. In addition to doing courses, we've also done crash data analysis when asked for, and assisted states and cities with selecting certain countermeasures that might be effective in certain situations. We also do webinars quarterly, typically with close to 1,000 people in attendance. And we've also done several peer exchanges. As mentioned, we've helped develop action plans and also helped with executive briefings to their leadership in effort to convince them on why pedestrian and bike safety and improvements are so important. Another thing that we do in our office, as mentioned, we have limited resources, so we try to focus on the things that'll have the biggest bang for the buck. In addition to pedestrians and bicycles, roadway departure crashes and intersection crashes are other areas that we focus on. For the purposes of this presentation, I'll just talk about the countermeasures that are related to pedestrians and bikes. And what we're doing is we just, encourage the states and cities to implement these countermeasures wherever appropriate. So the ones for pedestrians and bikes are walkways, medians and pedestrian crossing islands in urban and suburban areas, road diets, pedestrian hybrid beacon, and leading pedestrian intervals. And in the interest of time, I'll just quickly go over these. Road diets are basically a conversion of a 4-lane road to a 3-lane road. With typically they have either parking or bike lanes on either side. And they've demonstrated a 19 to 47% reduction in total roadway crashes where implemented. Leading pedestrian intervals, that's basically just giving the pedestrian a few seconds head start with the walk signal so that they get to establish their presence more in the crosswalk before vehicles turn, or they're much more visible that way. And leading pedestrian intervals have demonstrated a 13% reduction in pedestrian vehicle crashes at intersections. So medians with marked crosswalks, this is pretty self-explanatory. I mean, the purpose of these is to just, if you have a larger road, it gives a pedestrian the opportunity to cross one direction of traffic at a time, and then gives them time to think about the next one instead of having to rush across the roadway and trying to anticipate what two ways of traffic are doing. So medians with marked crosswalks have demonstrated a 46% reduction in pedestrian crashes. Pedestrian refuge islands have demonstrated a 56% reduction in pedestrian crashes. And pedestrian hybrid beacon, it's basically like a half signal for pedestrians. It doesn't have all the different phases of a regular traffic signal. And we don't call it a signal because then it would have to follow certain warrants. So these have demonstrated a 55% reduction in pedestrian crashes, a 29% reduction in total crashes, and a 15% reduction in fatal and serious injury crashes. And right after I sent my presentation on Friday, we actually just added more countermeasures to the list, and I didn't have a chance to totally incorporate them into my presentation, but I've provided a web link below where you can go look at them and peruse them, on your own time. So crosswalk visibility enhancements, bicycle lanes, and rectangular rapid flashing beacons are also added to the list as of Friday. And lastly, I wanted to just talk briefly about complete streets. This is something that's very important to the current administration and to our acting federal highway administrator. And basically a complete street focuses on being safe and feeling safe for everybody using it and not just moving as many vehicles as quickly as possible. It's basically like reclaiming the streets for everybody and making them available for everybody. So we have a working group that we've established within the last 6 months, and it's looking at updating our processes within our organization to see how we can more incorporate complete streets It's focused on educating and training practitioners and changing measures of success that we have at the Federal Highway Administration and making those more focused on complete streets and not mainly vehicles. And some of the early activities we've undertaken are developing a web portal for complete streets, working on a report to Congress on the impact of our rules and our policies and procedures on the safety of all road users, training and outreach through our division offices, and undertaking a baseline assessment of state complete street implementation to see where we are now, and then so that we can measure it over time. And that completes my portion of the presentation. Here's a link to my webpage and my contact information if you have any questions. And also at the bottom is how you can order any document that we have available in hard copy.
All right. Thank you, Tamara. Thanks for distilling down a tremendous amount of work that you all are doing into a nice small package for us. It's a lot. It's a lot of good work. So we have just a couple of questions. We have a couple of minutes. So, you know, we heard a lot about a lot of the thoughtful kind of current efforts and work, and I'm wondering if you can give us, and you touched on this, of what you're working, of the Complete Streets Working Group and other efforts are working towards right now. But any other thoughts you have on kind of exciting opportunities for pedestrian safety improvements on the horizon, and or biggest barriers to this work that you're seeing that we really, as a community of transportation professionals and advocates, really need to be thinking about, kind of working on and thinking through? That's kind of a big question, but any piece of that you want to take is great.
Well, I mean, obviously the complete streets I see as the biggest opportunity, because it's a different way of looking at things. It's a different way. So it's looking at transportation as a whole and not just as vehicle focused as we have been. So I think the number of states and cities, or the cities that are very interested in implementing complete streets policies, I see that as a very big win and a very big way forward. In terms of things that'll get in the way or barriers, I would say funding is always a huge one. I mean, that's having enough money to do the things you want to do. I mean, if the sky was the limit, certainly people would, have enough money for those things they want to do. And also, I think a lot of times leadership is a hindrance. Whatever your state wants to focus on becomes the priority. And so that obviously is another thing that gets in the way.
All right, thank you. No, those are great. We have a couple of other, one might be a point of clarification. So we had one
Sure.
question on, it looked like South Carolina was on the list of states, but they didn't see it on a slide that showed states and cities, and they were wondering if South Carolina, I think, is included in any of these efforts. I don't know if you know.
Oh, let me look at my thing real quick. So it looks like South Carolina as a whole, but there aren't any MPO areas. So just the entire state is included. But I wasn't involved with I managed this program for 17 years, and now we have a new person that's doing it. So I wasn't totally involved in the development of the new list. But it does look like South Carolina is included. It's just not as an MPO, I guess.
Interesting. Okay. All right. That's great. So related to that, another question on how, and I think you covered this a little bit, or you said the process had changed related to how you choose the focus states. I know you had mentioned highest kind of rates of pedestrian and cyclist fatalities, but then that was shifting, and someone wanted more clarification on the prioritization process.
That's a good question. It was very complicated. I remember. I could certainly, if that person wants to give me their contact information, I could, direct them to the web page, I think, where it has more information. I know they've established a new web page, but I don't know what the link is just yet.
No, that is great. Okay, we will definitely share that information.
Okay.
And to reach out. But thank you so much. I really, really appreciate you providing that overview. It was wonderful.
Yeah, and sorry I have to leave early, but This
No
was,
worries.
I'm glad I could participate.
Thank
Thanks.
you. All right. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Jessica Cicchino, who will also be providing kind of that national perspective from the research side of things on some updates on pedestrian safety research. So Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Becky. Let me just share my screen. All right, so Becky started out very nicely talking about a safe system approach to safety, where different parts of the system need to work together to anticipate the kinds of errors that humans make and proactively address them. And one important part of the system are the vehicles in the system. And so today I'm going to concentrate on vehicles and their role in a safe system, and in particular, how vehicles can be improved to improve pedestrian safety. And so one way that vehicles can help with pedestrian safety is by preventing crashes from happening altogether. And so pedestrian detection technology is one way we can do that. And this would be technology that warns a driver when they're about to hit a pedestrian and might also apply the brakes if the driver doesn't stop in time, to try to prevent crashes from occurring altogether. And so I'm just going to show a short video from an old Super Bowl commercial from a few years ago to give you an idea of what that looks like if you're not familiar with it.
Can you give me a warning? Sure. Warning, here comes your ticket. Oh, in my face! So aggressive!
A car that doesn't get distracted. Auto emergency braking with pedestrian detection. On the all-new Hyundai Elantra.
And so we're starting to see evidence that these systems are working. And so in an IHS study, it's brand new, we actually haven't even released this yet, we're seeing that these systems are associated with about a 25% drop in pedestrian crash risk, either for all pedestrian crashes or for those involving an injury to the pedestrian. And because these systems are proving to be effective, at IHS, we have for a couple years now been testing and rating pedestrian detection systems. And so what we do to do this is we run the vehicles through tests in 3 different scenarios. And the first one on the left simulates an adult walking out in the road perpendicularly in front of the vehicle. That test is run at 12 and 25 miles an hour. The test in the middle is a little more challenging. So this one simulates a child running out from behind a parked car, again, run at 12 and 25 miles an hour. And the test on the right is supposed to simulate a walking along the roadway crash. And so here we have the pedestrian dummy standing near the side of the road facing away from the vehicle. And that test is run at a slightly higher speed at 25 and 37 miles an hour because those crashes tend to happen at higher speeds. And so let me just show you a couple of short videos of these tests. So this first video is going to show the adult walking out, crossing in front of the vehicle. And here next is the child pedestrian running out from behind parked cars. And then the third test is the walking along the roadway. And so none of the vehicles that you saw here did a particularly good job at preventing these crashes. And when we first started running these tests in 2019, we saw that about half of the vehicles that we rate didn't have one of these systems available. And only about 1 in 5 got our top rating of superior. So the vehicles are rated either superior, advanced, or basic, depending on how much they reduce the vehicle's speed in those test scenarios. But now we're seeing some better news. So by 2021, we're seeing that nearly all of the vehicles that we rate have a pedestrian detection system, and nearly half of them have a top rated system rated superior that's doing a good job at preventing crashes. But one thing that we would want to make sure of to be able to have these systems prevent fatalities is that they're working in the kinds of scenarios where pedestrian fatalities tend to occur. And one of those really big risk factors for pedestrian deaths is darkness. And so we know that driving in the dark is risky in general. About 22% of miles traveled occur in the dark versus more than half or about half of all crash deaths. But when it comes to pedestrian and bicyclist deaths, we see an even greater risk at night, that about 3/4 occur in the dark. And for pedestrians, it's actually even more than that, closer to 80% in 2019. And unfortunately, when we're looking at the crash performance of pedestrian detection systems, we're not seeing evidence that they're working in dark and unlit conditions. And so the first bar here is showing that they are working in daylight. We're also seeing evidence that it appears that they're working in dark conditions when there's some kind of lighting, like overhead street lights or dawn or dusk. But in those dark and unlighted conditions, we're not seeing evidence that the system is preventing crashes. And so at IHS, we're doing some testing of pedestrian crash prevention systems in the dark. And we're essentially running vehicles through those same test scenarios that we do during the day, but on our dark covered track at night with no overhead lights. And so our goal here is to show automakers what these systems are doing at night, to try to encourage them to improve their systems, improve the technology on them so that they can prevent these pedestrian crashes at night, which again is really crucial for preventing pedestrian fatalities. But luckily, we do have a technology that can help with pedestrian crashes in the dark. And maybe it might not be something that you might think of as a technology because it's been around forever, and that would be headlights. IHS has started rating headlights in 2016, and we found that there's actually a really big difference in how well headlights light up the road. So we rate our headlights good, acceptable, marginal, or poor, depending on how well they light up the road. And this Toyota Prius V that you see on the left gets our top rating of good. And so you can see that you can, kind of see this pedestrian dummy's legs up ahead. And if you look closely, you can even see these deer targets that are about 200 feet out. But those same things are there in the scene on the right, but you can't really see them. So lights are really important to being able to see pedestrians and other things that are on the road in front of you that are unlit. And when we first started doing these ratings in 2016, we saw that most headlights were pretty bad. Most vehicles that we tested didn't offer any headlights that got above the worst rating of poor, but luckily things have been getting better. And so now in 2021, we see that about half of all 2021 model year vehicles at least offer a headlight that gets the top rating of good. An unfortunate thing is that sometimes these are optional equipment or on only specific trim levels. And so consumers might still have to search to find those really good headlights when they're shopping for a car. And just a couple of weeks ago, we also released a new study showing that good rated headlights reduce crash risk at night relative to what they do during the daytime. And we're seeing that's the case even with pedestrian crashes. And so we're seeing more than a 20% drop in nighttime pedestrian crashes on vehicles with good rated headlights compared to those with poor rated headlights. And so it's unfortunate that we're seeing that pedestrian detection systems might not be working so well in the dark yet, but at least we're seeing these improvements in headlights that can really help until these pedestrian detection systems catch up. And so another role that vehicles can play in pedestrian safety is by making crashes less severe. So if a crash does occur, reducing the severity of that crash. And designs to improve pedestrian safety usually focus on essentially making the front end of the vehicle softer. And so some ways you can do that, for example, would be by streamlining the contour of the front end, maybe hiding some of the hard parts of the vehicle so they're not in places where pedestrians tend to hit the vehicle. So for example, hiding those wiper mounts. Also things like providing some space between the hood and the hard engine parts underneath, or energy absorbing bumper materials can also help. And so in some other countries, places like in Europe and in Japan, they do testing of vehicles to see how well they protect pedestrians. And these tests typically simulate a head hitting the hood and a leg hitting the bumper. And we don't do this kind of testing in the United States, but it's not necessarily because the federal government isn't interested in these kinds of tests. They are very interested in doing this kind of testing. But one big challenge we have in the United States is the changing nature of our vehicle fleet, which I'm sure is of no surprise to any of you who are watching. SUVs have become increasingly popular in recent years. And when we look over the past decade, we see the number of pedestrian fatalities involving an SUV has about doubled. And we've seen increases in pedestrian fatalities across the board for all kinds of vehicles, but it's been especially large for SUVs. in part because, or maybe even entirely because of how popular SUVs have become. And one thing we've known for a long time are that larger and taller vehicles like SUVs and pickup trucks are deadlier to pedestrians than smaller and lighter vehicles like passenger cars. And a recent IHS study showed that this is still the case, unfortunately. And we looked at injury severity of pedestrians struck by cars and by SUVs in an in-depth sample of crashes taken in Michigan. And we saw that injury severity was higher for SUVs than what we saw for cars. And this increased as speeds increased. And so I think this really draws attention to the important interplay between the different parts of the system that pedestrians operate in, that we really need to lower speeds so that our vehicles can protect pedestrians the most as well. So to sum up, vehicles are an important part of the system when it comes to protecting pedestrians, and there are a few different ways that they can help. So pedestrian detection systems are reducing pedestrian crashes, which is great, and headlights are helping to reduce pedestrian crashes at night, or headlights can be improved to reduce pedestrian crashes at night. And vehicles can be designed to make crashes less severe for pedestrians. But again, it's really important to note that different parts of the system interplay with each other. And so, like I just said on the last slide, speed is really important to many of these vehicle countermeasures. And something I didn't really get into before, but that is also the case, is that some of those vehicle-based countermeasures to try to improve survivability in a crash work the best at lower speeds. And pedestrian detection systems also work the best at lower speeds. And so if we can work on roadway countermeasures to lower speeds, we're also going to see our vehicles performing better as well. And thank you. That is all that I have today. So I'll be happy to take your questions.
Thanks, Jessica. That was wonderful. It was really exciting to hear some of the new research coming out. And we have a question that actually popped up that's very related to kind of what you just ended on, and I was not aware of this, so I don't know if you will, but the question is there any effort or plan in the US to set cars to automatically adjust to lower speeds when they're in urban areas, like is being considered in parts of Europe? I don't know if you know much about that.
Yeah, so that's a really great question. And that would be a really important kind of countermeasure. There have not been efforts in the US to try to introduce what we sometimes call intelligent speed assistance or intelligent speed adaptation, like they're doing in Europe. But that's another really important vehicle-based countermeasure that we could be moving towards that would make a really big difference if we were doing this in the United States, because that's another kind of countermeasure that we've seen that really does work to lower speeds.
Wonderful, thank you. Yeah, I'll have to look into that more. I was not aware of some of those advancements in Europe. We have a couple of more questions. So, kind of a broad question. So what types of policies do you think states or even municipalities could be considering to regulate safer vehicles? I don't know if you're aware of any that could be considered at the state and municipality level to help with that aspect.
Well, a lot of the regulation for vehicle safety does happen on the federal level for vehicle safety standards. Some things that we have been seeing on the more local level is localities trying to be a leader in introducing these features into their local fleet, like into their municipal fleet. And so, having vehicles that have some of these crash avoidance technologies and just making sure that, they have top safety ratings and things like that could be really helpful for just showing that you're a leader in this space and, and that the locality thinks that some of these kinds of safety features are important. But when it comes to requiring them on all vehicles, that's typically something that's done at a federal level.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Another question, so related to kind of your discussion of headlights. So there are test and minimum regulations for bumper safety. And the question is, why do you think there aren't for headlights necessarily?
That's a really great question. And so the headlight standards have been the same for a really, really long time. And it's something that we do think should change, and in particular to allow for some kinds of new types of headlight designs that the federal government is starting to consider. One of those would be designs that can help with you using your high beams that can essentially use kind of like an LED kind of pattern for high beams and just kind of cut out the spot where another vehicle is when they're passing you by. And things like that could be really helpful for improving headlights and for escalating improvements in them to make them so people can better see the roadway. With our headlight ratings, we've seen that better headlights tend to be a mix of newer technologies, but also even simple things like how the headlights are aimed. And so just paying attention to kind of the whole package of them is really helpful for improving headlights.
Wonderful. So I think we have just one more. There was a question related to what you had talked about with rating systems. So if we know that truck and SUV designs are more dangerous to pedestrians, to the public, why is there no rating systems or standards for safety outside the motor vehicle, like you had mentioned there are in, I guess, Europe and Japan and other places?
Well, one thing is that we have a very good idea of how pedestrians are injured by cars. And so that is why these testing systems that are in Europe and Japan, they focus on tests that were designed for cars. And for SUVs, since their popularity has only increased fairly recently, we're just starting to collect some of that in-depth data now to really understand how SUVs are injuring pedestrians, which is important to know to be able to figure out how they should be changed to better protect pedestrians. And so I'm hopeful that some of this research will be able to come down the pike soon so that we can improve these designs to help protect pedestrians further.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. There's still more questions, but we will try to maybe pass some of those on over. And thank you for that update. That was wonderful. It was really exciting to hear about some of the new research coming out. So with that, I am going to turn it over next to Mark Ezel, who will talk a little bit about kind of what's being done in North Carolina to advance some of these efforts in communities across the state.
Thank you very much, Becky. Let me make sure that I am sharing my slides appropriately. Let's see. And I'm taking mine, it looks like backward, but there we go. Now's the start. So let's see. Let me make sure that I've got this in slide share. So a little bit about Vision Zero in North Carolina. First of all, as you all know, the Vision Zero approach is about basically making the safe systems approach and concept reality in policy and reality in the way we handle things locally. For a lot of us at state highway safety offices, I mean, the watchword has been, we need to change human behavior. And if we just get humans to act right, then somehow we will be able to solve traffic safety issues. And obviously, many of us have known, and some of us in the field of with state highway safety offices and NHTSA are slowly coming to realize that it's really a whole lot more complicated than that. That people are fallible and they make mistakes. That includes drivers, that includes bicyclists, that includes pedestrians, that includes all of us. And that the roads need to be built, our policies need to be built, and our designs need to be built to recognize that fallibility and to not make it so that when you make mistakes, you pay for it with your life. Well, in North Carolina, this approach is something that I think we have jumped on in many cases quicker than they have in other states. Let me give you a little, here we go. In 2015, North Carolina created, the governor at that time, Governor McCrory, declared a North Carolina Vision Zero goal. I'm not sure that, frankly, when that was declared, that everybody top to bottom in state government really understood the implications of Vision Zero and what it meant in the way that we do now. I think folks were embracing complete streets. They were embracing the idea that we need to do things a little bit differently. But it was more, I think, of a phrase before it became a policy. In 2017, my office, I was appointed to this role in 2017. And that year, the Governor's Highway Safety Program began funding Vision Zero in North Carolina. And essentially, we started working in a couple of different areas with Vision Zero. One, we wanted to build community groups. And you'll be hearing more about the community groups later in this week's seminars. But we began building Vision Zero communities. We also realized that there was a significant data lag, that there was a need to provide more public awareness of existing data around traffic safety. So we began working and funding on a Vision Zero website that helped provide that data as well. But our main emphasis was really going to be our communities. We had our 5-year strategic highway safety plan in North Carolina with the working goal to cut fatalities and serious injuries by half in 2035, achieving a Vision Zero by 2050. Clearly, we have a long way to go. Obviously, we've just seen some FARS data from 2021 that shows it was an awfully bad year. But part of what's going to get us there is going to be community efforts and community-led efforts to bring together behavior change, engineering change, safe systems, safe users, safe roads, and all of that as much together as we can. The individual look of those plans to really implement Vision Zero, I think, are going to be very different from one city to another. Obviously, what Charlotte wants to do is going to look very different from what might need to be done in a small community in Eastern North Carolina. And so we've taken that into account with our Vision Zero efforts. As I mentioned, one of the things that we offer is technical assistance to communities with an interest in Vision Zero. And we do that through a grant to the UNC Injury Prevention Research Center, working closely with the Highway Safety Research Center to provide technical assistance to communities that are interested in putting together Vision Zero plans. And then we also have, as I mentioned, research and data. There's a data analytics page that is pretty detailed, updated every 3 months on the NC Vision Zero website. I urge you to check that out. That has got the latest and greatest crash data that has been put into a very usable, very graphic form to help municipalities, MCOs, counties, and others plan their crash efforts. In fact, the State Highway Patrol uses that data regularly to plan some of their efforts. So we've been working, as I mentioned, since 2017 around Vision Zero. And so far, you can see some of these communities. In fact, I think this has been updated since this particular thing was created, that are already in the process of putting together Vision Zero plans. And some of them are big, some of them are small. As you can imagine, a Greensboro plan and a Greenville plan are going to look different. That's how it should be. A Charlotte plan and a Robson County plan are going to look different. But there's one common theme, and the one common theme is that the communities are the ones who are the leaders in building their own Vision Zero plans. And they've done it in so many different ways. In Charlotte, for instance, there was actually a bond proposal that was passed a couple of years back to help fund Vision Zero efforts. In each of these communities, the main thing that we're interested in doing is making sure that community buy-in isn't one of the main things we're interested in doing, is making sure community buy-in just isn't limited to those of us who are are transportation experts or transportation nerds, but that it also encompasses community leaders, people with very little knowledge about the nuts and bolts of transportation. They just want for them and their kids and their families to be able to move about the community safely and effectively. So we've got a diverse group of stakeholders in these communities. To give you a little bit of the flavor of what we're asking them to do, there are really 4 phases to a successful Vision Zero plan. One is the exploration phase. They will reach out to the, you may have a transportation planner or someone with a local government who reaches out to our folks at IPRIC or Highway Safety Research Center and says, look, I'm interested. I've heard about this Vision Zero idea. I want to do something. I don't know what to do. Can you help? They're the folks that are in the exploration stage, and they are given information about, the various types of folks who want to be a part of a coalition. They're given information about how to explain Vision Zero in plain English to members of their council or members of their community. They're given information about how to put together a city council resolution around Vision Zero and how to get that passed. And they're given information about how a plan ought to be structured. From there, you see a number of folks that are also in the installation phase. They're in the process of putting together their Vision Zero plan. They've got a quality coalition. They just need to know what a plan ought to look like. And so we provide information around that. Then once that plan has been put together, has strong community input, there's the initial implementation phase and then full implementation. So in 3 years, we've seen a number of different communities that have kind of shifted in and out these admittedly slightly arbitrary designations because, folks who are transportation professionals tend to be busy folks. And so some may be in a position to really work on Vision Zero efforts full time, whereas others are picking this up as part of a very large plate. And so a large part of what we're doing with our grant to IPRIC and HSRC is to not only give these communities the tools they need, but also bring in other communities to expand the Vision Zero efforts. It looks very different in North Carolina from what it may look in a state like New York or California. That's as it should be, but the principles are basically the same. That we can enforce our way out of the problem of traffic safety. That a lot of this work around design and human behavior needs to be really integrated better, and that good transportation really bleeds over into so many other important areas, such as community health, parks and rec, just overall quality planning to begin with, greenways, issues of that nature, and that looking at transportation safety from kind of a holistic approach. So I believe it is on Thursday that you'll be hearing from Elise Keefe, who's on the call today, but who will be speaking a little bit later, specifically about some of the work that she's doing. And you'll also hear from some of those Vision Zero communities. And so we need people who are, from the bike pay and advocacy space to be a part of those Vision Zero communities. And that's one thing that I'd really urge you to, as a takeaway from today's discussion. So Becky, I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Thanks, Mark. That was great. Thank you for that overview and bringing it back to North Carolina and giving people a kind of call to action for how they can get involved in this important work. So again, if we have a couple of minutes for just a couple of questions, so if you have any, please do put those in the Q&A box. But to get us started, we have one which is just kind of looking forward. We got a good picture of kind of where we are as a state right now, where some of these Vision Zero communities are right now. What are you most kind of excited about in Vision Zero, or kind of opportunities you see for this work in North Carolina over the next few years? And or do you think there's any barriers that we need to be working through as a community together, and people on this call need to be thinking about kind of tackling together?
Well, I think the big barrier is funding, but not funding in the traditional sense. The traditional sense of funding is, wow, we don't have enough money. I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem really is that on a federal level, the funding streams are really so segmented. And we're discussing reauthorization of the FAST Act. But the FAST Act a few years back was just so, what's the best way to put this? What's the best way to put this in a recorded conversation? It was so segmented toward the way we were thinking of traffic safety, 8 or 10 years ago. And we need to make sure that the new FAST Act has some of the barriers in how you spend money eliminated. So I think that's going to help a lot. I think also, one of the things that I'm excited about, Becky, is the opportunity to get new voices and new people involved in planning safe transportation in their communities. I think that's really key, and that's something that I'm really excited about, seeing new people involved that previously we haven't seen.
And I think we have time for just one more question. So we had one, and you really did touch on this quite a bit kind of throughout, in that so many of the Vision Zero communities we often see and hear about and are on the kind of headlines are like your New York and your San Francisco, and that's not North Carolina, right? We have a lot of smaller, rural, kind of rich communities here. And you mentioned that it's probably going to look quite different what Vision Zero looks like in New York City versus what it looks in kind of rural North Carolina, obviously. But can you speak any more to, I guess, some of the differences or similarities that you see in terms of applying Vision Zero in kind of one of those larger cities and one of the smaller cities here in North Carolina?
Yeah, can you repeat that question real quick? I'm sorry.
Yeah, just thinking about how this is going to look different. What we're doing in North Carolina, what we're doing in some of our smaller rural communities will look different than what obviously a New York City is doing. But I don't know if you want to expand on any kind of differences or common themes between applying Vision Zero, irrespective of the size of the community.
Yeah, I think the differences are, if you look at a place like Robson County, one of the groups that we're trying to involve in are people who we think are opinion leaders in that community. And so we're doing a lot of outreach to clergy. And, that's going to be something that's very important in a rural county like Robson County in North Carolina, or maybe. It's not going to be, it is very important, I think, in a lot of other communities as well, but they're especially opinion leaders in that community who we think can make a big difference. And so that potentially is an outreach effort that you might do in a Robson County, but you might not have in quite the same way in a large city. But there's some real commonalities, and one of those commonalities is being able to bring diverse people to the table. But that diversity is going to look different from place to place to place. And so reaching out beyond the usual suspects is always a challenge. And I think that's going to be a challenge everywhere we go, but it's also a big opportunity.
All right, thank you. And I know we are just about at time. So we will follow up. There's a couple of remaining questions, and I thank everyone for submitting them and being engaged. And we will try to follow up after this and connecting people with the speakers. But I just wanted to thank the panelists once more and thank BikeWalkNC for putting on this session. And I'm going to turn it back over to Terry to make a few final announcements.
Thank you, everybody. That was really amazing, a presentation. And we're so grateful to have such an esteemed line of presenters today. Very proud to have each and every one of you here at our pre-summit session, but also to have Vision Zero highlighted during the summit this week. So this concludes our session today. It's going to be viewable live on YouTube after the summit is over. And we also want to invite you to, if you haven't already, to attend the rest of the sessions in the summit. We're going to have an LCI training class over the next 3 days. And then we're going to have some more pre-summit workshops on Thursday. And we're going to be directly engaged in a hybrid event on Friday and Saturday. So glad to have you all here today. Thanks very much for your participation. Thanks to our panelists, and see you soon. Take care and be safe out there.